Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing Anomalisa, and this is directed by writer-turned-writer-director Charlie Kaufman and his partner Duke Johnson. If you watch my videos regularly, you know I am a huge fan of Charlie Kaufman. I think that he is one of the great artistic minds that is working in filmmaking today, and I just practically worship the ground he walks on. He's written some of the more introspective, complex, and surrealistic films that have kind of cracked through the surface of the mainstream and at least gone to a cult status. He wrote films like Adaptation, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, being John Malkovich, and then of course he directed his first film in 2008, and that was Synecdoche, New York. I reviewed that film a few months ago for this channel, and it's one of my favorite films of the last 10 years, no question. I know that a lot of people have struggled with it, myself included, and it's not a film that's easy to digest, and it's definitely not a very mainstream film. But I think that's the point. It's a film that captures this sense of chaos, this sense of like cerebral entanglement, if you will. It's a film that captures the inner workings of your mind, your creativity, and it's about the meaning of life and how we perceive it, what it means to come to term with death, and also what it means to come to term with the aches of being alive. Kaufman achieves all of this in very ambitious ways by really kind of breaking down what is the traditional norm of storytelling and doing things in a very non-traditional narrative. And Anomalisa certainly has a lot of that existential angst going for it that is a running theme in all of Kaufman films. But this film was it actually surprised me in that it was very simple, very subdued. There's a very small cast of characters, and it takes place primarily in one location in a hotel. And oh yeah, and it's also stop motion animation, so it's almost like Charlie Kaufman's Kafka-esque version of like Wallace and Gromit. So the film is about a very well-respected author named Michael Stone, and he is on a business trip to Cincinnati. He has a wife and a child, but he is very obviously depressed. He is growing more and more bored with his life, and he's just kind of drowning in how mundane it feels to him. And the film starts out with him very clearly feeling alienated and very distant from this very superficial consumer culture that we live in. In the midst of his stay at the hotel, he meets a woman named Lisa, and he is just immediately taken with her. He senses a vibrancy in her that he cannot see in anybody else, and he just immediately falls head over heels in love with her. So with this film, I'm very torn about it because I kind of see it in two ways. There's a part of me that sees it through the Charlie Kaufman filter. Because I respect him so much, I wanted it so badly to live up to some of his previous works. But there's another part of me that feels it's important to be able to see the film as though I had never seen a Kaufman film before, because each film is a new experience. So I think with this review, I think I'm going to try to approach it in both ways, the biased and the non-biased version. As a whole, there are a lot of different story devices that are implemented throughout the film to kind of give a feeling, like a conscious feeling of alienation, depression, and a world that is so cut off from the intimacy that we crave so much. And I think some of those devices worked well for me, and then others didn't. This is a film that really does capture the zeitgeist, the 21st century, and it's very similar to films like Lost in Translation and Up in the Air, you know, films of that nature from the last 10, 15 years. But I think the fact that it is an animated film really works in its favor because it's that irony of trying to make a film feels so eerily real, because the dialogue and the pacing of it feels almost beat for beat like real life, but it's that contrast. It's something that feels so organic in terms of what it's conveying, but yet the contrast of it is this very faux and literally lifeless appearance of the film. And it's a very clear metaphor, not one that I think is very hard to decipher, about, you know, the idea of truth and vulnerability, and that it's all hidden behind a society that tries to be so pristine, so collected, so PC. The idea that something is so human that it can't be expressed by real people. That's a really cool thing. And there were a few scenes that stood out to me. I love the scene between Michael and Lisa when they're by themselves, when they finally go back to his hotel room. That was a beautifully written scene that's very simple, seemingly simple, but it really does capture so many different facets of what's going on in the characters' minds. You know, you have this feeling of kind of nervousness, awkwardness, but also this sense of euphoria that both the characters may not have felt in a long time. It's relatable, but it's also capturing something that is not only just real life, but it's inspired by real life, which I think is very powerful. Yeah, so that was a standout for me, but I have to admit, a lot of the rest of the film did not really connect with me in the way that I think that it was intended to connect with the audience. The devices that sometimes felt really effective, and then other times they felt just kind of gimmicky and not as fully dimensional or as creative as I've seen from Kaufman in the past. A lot of it has to do with the first act of the film. There are many different setup scenes that try to build the character of Michael up until his call to adventure when he meets Lisa. It's showing kind of how he sees the world and how he reacts with certain different people and their dynamics, but it's very long and drawn out. Everything does feel very repetitive and uninteresting. And I totally understand on one hand that that is absolutely the point that Kaufman is going for. He wants us to feel that realism and that feeling of what it's like to be an American middle-aged man that is stuck in that midlife crisis. But I think that he's able to capture that idea in the first 2 scenes, maybe the first 3 scenes, and the rest of the time it felt more like he was trying to just hammer the idea of this mundane lifestyle into our minds. Sometimes I think that a lot of repetition can be a good thing to really drive a story forward. The thing that artists, writers, directors, whatever, I think the one thing that they need to understand if they're going to use a sort of realism and repetition like that, they need to be able to know that there's a fine line between reality and the story you're creating to give us the essence of reality. Some of the scenes really were able to take something that looks deceptively simple and add a lot of different facets to it. And I think that a lot of the other scenes felt like realism for the sake of realism, which was kind of hard for me to latch on to personally. I wonder if I wouldn't mind so much if the rest of the film wasn't such a typical narrative that we've seen a million times. And there's even a scene in the third act of the film, so I mean, I'm not gonna give it away, but it was a redemption scene. It's that moment of clarity for the main character. And I feel like that's a major gimmick, and I wish that they were able to convey that in a different way, because we've seen that scene so many different times. I mean, there's a scene almost the exact same in Up in the Air. And if you've seen that film, or if you've seen Anomalisa, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. For somebody that is so ambitious and imaginative as somebody like Kaufman, I expected more from him. It was the mix of being overly repetitive and having a story that is one that we've seen far too often that kind of made the film, again, difficult for me to connect to. And yeah, I do admit that I am very biased when it comes to Kaufman films. I'm totally admitting that because I have seen him take themes and ideas that are so painfully relatable and complex, and he's able to twist these ideas in so many directions. He warps them into ways that I have never seen before, and he presents them in ways that help me to feel things that I've never felt before. That's where he really shines, when he's taking film and art in general and just pushing it in so many unfamiliar directions. And that's not to say that Kaufman completely failed necessarily with Anomalisa in my eyes. Maybe I will need to return to it at a later point, and I'm sure I will once, you know, Kaufman has more films that he's directed. I'll want to look back on it, but as of now, there wasn't enough for me to really connect to it in ways that I have in the past with him, and I just kind of found it a bit safe and underwhelming. So that is my review. Thank you all for listening. If you want to follow me on Twitter, the link is below, and you can also like my Facebook page in the link below that one. Catch you next time.